Hello everyone, it's Raza von Werder, taking a break from my private personal life and talking about my work. Here's this book on the Beatific Vision, seeing God face to face. We've been talking about this for several segments, and I shall continue now with chapter 8. You can be holy while yet imperfect, but you cannot see God face to face while yet imperfect. I do not have to have a miserable life, but if I let my ego take over, I will. I am alone most of the time. If my ego tells me I'm lonely, then I am. But if I look at the bright side and absorb myself in God, then I am not lonely. I do think of all the prophets and saints and holy people of all religions who stayed alone. They meditated in caves and wildernesses and in huts and houses. St. Catherine of Siena stayed in her family's house in her own room for 2 years. These were the years preceding her mystical marriage with God. She also received the divine interior stigmata, which I also have. I'm going to get into that in the future. You may not live in a tropical or Mediterranean place where you can sleep in the wilderness. Many areas are too cold to stay outside. And if you are too far away, you may not be able to obtain food and other wants. I found God in a 6th-floor walk-up in Brooklyn. Those were some of the happiest days of my life. In this apartment, I sequestered myself for months. I had to go out to take care of daily business, but I did not work for a while. I lived off $50 a week, all I could afford. That was pocket money, outside of the money I paid for rent and utilities. My expenses were very small. I've always lived below my means all my life. And I was living in a very modest environment. I asked my friends and relatives not to contact me for a while. I sensed it had to be so. Sadly, they all misunderstood and thought I was shunning them. One best friend went to the verge of suicide because he thought I was rejecting him. Another wrote me a strange letter thinking I wanted her to send me money. She was delusional. It was a spiritual thing I had to do, and my intuition kicked in. I had to be alone. In this space, I lost myself and I lost my ego. I shall never forget the steps I went through and the results thereof. Late in 1981, I had gone through a crisis. Within this crisis, I understood that the best thing that had ever happened to me was the horrible abuse of my mother. Now, how apropos to my life story this is, because I didn't even remember. You know, if you don't keep a diary with all the things that happen, especially in your spiritual life, there is no way, unless you're some sort of a genius, that I'm not a genius in memory. So unless you have a genius photographic memory, there is no way you could ever remember everything. I have no memory of this, of what I wrote in 2009. No memory. It said, I went through a crisis where I understood the best thing that ever happened to me was the horrible abuse of my mother. I never saw it that way before, but now I knew in a revelation that made me cry for hours. I don't remember this. That my mother's abuse had put me on the same cross as Jesus. And there on the cross I united with him. It isn't the abuse that is holy, but what it leads to when you love God is holy. This vision began to break down my ego. This is amazing. Thank God I'm a fanatical journalist diary keeper. Because if I went now to remember my whole life, it would be impossible. In fact, many years ago, about 15 years ago, I put my whole life on audio tapes. I don't have an audio tape machine right now that works, but I should probably, if I ever want to remember everything that happened, I need to refer to those tapes, which I made about more than 15 years ago, about maybe at least 15 or more years ago. A short time later, I sensed that I was no longer myself. This is pivotal, this is key. Please hear me on this, because you'll learn something from this maybe. The self I was used to, I had no idea what this meant, but I was scared. I used to go to confession all the time then, and in a confession I asked the priest to pray for me as I was in trouble. This strange state lasted 3 days. I had no idea what it was. It was like most of my memory had been wiped out, and I was suspended in a space I did not understand. At the end of the 3 days, I can explain to you now, was the complete death of the ego and my old self. On the other side, mystical marriage and seeing God face to face. This happened in February 1982, and in March I saw God face to face again, even more spectacular than the first time. Many of the souls I had been helping in purgatory were released. My dad, my religious mentor, Reverend Berta Talbot, Errol Flynn, and others. These are the souls I was ministering to at the time, were suddenly released by my ascension. I was flabbergasted by my new state, as I knew nothing about it. I had never read books that explained the other side of the cross. I did not know what it was like to live as a spouse of Christ or as a person who was mystically married to God. I did not know anyone who had seen God face to face. And the only people I thought they had been dead for hundreds of years. And they did not explain what happened after the experience, only what was required to lead up to it. What did I do now? How do I live? How can I relate to the world again? I was in another world. I was in heaven, bliss, an ecstasy of sorts. I did not have the old ego and the hell of it. I was not attached to anyone or anything. I was a living, breathing, independent, totally secure and happy person. I could not relate to a single other person in the world, because everybody I knew was in the world and of the world, even good people. I remember I was friends with this priest, Father DePaul Ginsky. He was a good man, wonderful man. But he was not where I was at. He was of the world. He was doing things of the world. This is all they talked about related to. I knew nobody who wanted to talk about God all the time. And it didn't do to try and reach out to those in the Catholic Church. I took my manuscripts to priests and tried to talk to them about God. They looked at me as if I had two heads, as if I needed some kind of psychiatric counseling. I wrote to nuns and they only answered when I sent large donations. To me, $250 was a fortune, and that was the kind of money it took to get nuns to talk to me. I called all the convents, the universities, and places of religious learning, trying to get a friend to talk to. All the men who were heterosexuals were willing to talk and all wanted to meet me in person. I felt uncomfortable with this because I sensed it was going to be a man-woman thing. Finally, I did meet one friend, actually later, after the Divine Stigmata. He was a professor of spirituality at two leading universities. We did become friends and remained so for 2 years. He was the only person I could talk to at the time. To be continued.